After my hubby died, my parents sold my belongings and mocked my grief in front of the neighbors, calling me a useless widow. 11 years later, I was named world's most influential innovator on national television. That face, I said, pointing at the screen, is the one you spit on. I, 44 female, was widowed young when my husband died in a car accident. My parents, Odette and Roland, were cold and cruel, even selling my personal belongings while I was grieving and publicly mocking me in front of neighbors. I cut ties and worked silently for over a decade. 11 years later, I won a national award for medical innovation. When my parents called me for the first time since they betrayed me, I walked into their house while my face was on TV and said just one thing: that face is the one you spit on. My whole life changed, but not in the way they expected. "You're on TV," my mom said over the phone. It was the first time I'd heard her voice in 11 years. My parents hadn't seen me since they stripped my life bare and left me to rot in my grief. I let the silence hang before responding, "Yeah. I know. It's a re-airing of the awards ceremony." Another pause. Then her voice again. Smaller this time. "Your father wants to talk to you." I didn't answer right away. I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window, the evening light casting long shadows behind me. "I'm coming over," I said. "But I'm not coming to talk." The night my husband Reuben died, there was light rain on the roads. He was on his way home from school, where he taught biology at Johnston High. We had been trying to get pregnant. I had even started knitting baby socks with little bees stitched into them. But then he was gone. They said the drunk driver didn't even brake. The collision happened at a busy intersection just 10 minutes from our home in Clayton, North Carolina. The kind of place where people wave at each other from their porches and everyone knows your dog's name. I was 33. And a widow. My parents arrived 3 days after the funeral. Odette stood in the doorway with a pinched expression, eyes scanning my living room like she was inspecting a motel. "Still haven't cleaned up the flowers?" she asked. My father didn't even sit down. I thought they came to comfort me. They came to supervise. They stayed for a week. During that week, I stopped recognizing them. They picked at everything: how I looked, how I dressed, how weak I sounded when I talked about Reuben. My mother kept calling it a phase. My father would just mutter things under his breath. The worst part wasn't the silence between us, it was the words they did say. "You weren't married that long. You'll move on. You don't work a real job. You have time to mourn. We didn't when we were your age. You've cried enough. What is this, a pity marathon?" Then came the day I came home from my grief support group and found my house half empty. Reuben's vinyls? Gone. My stack of sketchbooks? Gone. The blue armchair I used to sit in with him, curled under a quilt? Gone. "You need a clean slate," Odette said, like she was a therapist on a reality show. "You had no right," I started to say, but she cut me off. "You didn't need all that junk." Then she said it. The line I've never forgotten. "Honestly, Soraya, you're becoming a useless widow." I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. I just went to my room and locked the door, then cried into a blanket that still smelled like him. I moved out 2 weeks later. Packed what was left of my life into 3 boxes. Rented an attic apartment above a bookstore in Durham. It smelled like old paper and coffee and I loved it. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't send holiday cards. I faded from their world like I'd never existed. But in that attic, between the grief and the dust and the leaking ceiling, I began to build something. Reuben and I had always talked about building something meaningful. A project that could detect autoimmune issues long before symptoms showed up, an early warning system using medical data and predictive modeling. We'd scribbled notes about it on napkins and post-its. We used to joke about naming it Sentinel. He'd say, "Every good night needs a sentinel." I didn't know how to build it, not fully. But I had time, and grief is a heck of a motivator. I worked during the day for a remote analytics firm, then coded at night. I learned machine learning from online courses. I read white papers with a dictionary in hand. I cold emailed researchers. I got ignored a lot. Sometimes kindly. Sometimes with silence. I tried pitching to small VC firms. Some thought I was naive. Some were blunt: medical startups don't work unless you have an MD on board. Or unless you're a man. Then I met Dr. Farheen Asfour. She was giving a talk at a healthcare data summit in DC. I wasn't supposed to be there. I snuck in with a badge I borrowed from a friend who worked registration. She had lost her younger brother to lupus. When I mentioned Sentinel, she didn't brush me off. She leaned in. We started collaborating. She brought the scientific credentials. I brought the tech backbone. Together, we made it work. Sentinel was born. By the time I was 40, Sentinel was being tested in hospitals across the East Coast. It was diagnosing conditions like lupus and rheumatoid arthritis before symptoms turned chronic. We caught disease earlier. We gave people time. Just like Ruben wanted. By 42, Novescence was operating in 3 countries. At 44, Time magazine called. I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. I'll never forget the moment I stood on stage in that sleeveless navy dress, award in hand, lights burning overhead. They played a video of my journey, clips from hospital visits, interviews, that one grainy photo of Ruben and me with our bikes outside a bed and breakfast in Asheville. I said a lot of things in that speech, but the part that went viral was this: to anyone who's ever been called weak for grieving, for loving too hard, or for dreaming while broken, this is for you. And for Ruben, you were right. We built something that lasts. I didn't know my parents would see it. I didn't know it would be re-aired on CBS a week later, with my name flashing on screen in gold. And I certainly didn't expect my mother to call. That night, I stood in the doorway of their living room, watching their old TV flicker with my face frozen mid-sentence. My father was sitting silently on the sofa. My mother stood near the archway, hands folded like she didn't know what to do with them. I didn't ask them how they were. I didn't cry. I pointed to the TV. That face, I said, is the one you spit on. My father looked like he wanted to speak, but no sound came out. I turned around and walked out the door. As I walked back to my rental car, I felt the kind of weight you only realize you've been carrying once you finally set it down. I hadn't come there for forgiveness or confrontation. I just needed them to see me. Not the version they boxed away in grief and shame. Not the useless widow they mocked to anyone who'd listen. Just me, alive, standing, and successful on my own terms. The air outside was still warm, but it had that crisp tinge of fall. I sat in the car a while, engine off, watching the neighbor's porch light flicker on across the street. I wondered if Mrs. Hollinger still lived there, the same one who watched my mother laugh at me while I clutched Ruben's photo like a life raft. I wondered if she remembered. I didn't go back to Seattle immediately. I stayed in Chapel Hill for the rest of the week to finish up a university guest lecture. It was surreal, being asked to speak to students about leadership under pressure while part of me still felt like the quiet girl who cried under her blanket in an attic above a bookstore. After the talk, I grabbed coffee with a professor named Eileen who had co-authored a journal paper with Dr. Asfour. She was in her 60s, sharp-eyed, but warm. After about 10 minutes of polite small talk, she looked at me and asked, "You always carry grief like armor, or just today?" I laughed. A real one. The kind that caught me off guard. Depends on the day, I said. Today, maybe it's a little thicker. We didn't talk about the award. Not really. Instead, we talked about resilience. How some people believe it looks like strength, when really it's just showing up again and again, even when you're shattered. Later that night, I went back to the hotel and opened my laptop. I had 312 unread messages in my inbox. Most were congratulations. A few were requests for interviews. Buried somewhere in the middle, there was one from a neighborhood Facebook group I hadn't thought about in years. Apparently someone had posted the award clip and tagged my parents' street address in it. The caption read, "That's the little girl from Ridgeview Drive. The one her parents called crazy after her husband died. Look at her now." I didn't reply. I just stared at it, mouth slightly open, remembering all those Sundays my parents had dragged me to church just to show off that they were raising a proper daughter. The irony wasn't lost on me. The next day, I drove back through Clayton on a whim. The town hadn't changed much. The diner still had that busted neon sign. The little bookstore on Main had a new name but still sold the same dust-covered classics in the window. The house Ruben and I bought, the one with the peeling green shutters, was freshly painted white now. A tire swing hung from the tree in the front yard. There was a tricycle in the driveway. A woman stepped outside, holding a toddler on her hip. She looked at me briefly, squinting like she was trying to place my face. I gave a small wave. She smiled and waved back. And that was it. That was all I needed. I drove on. Back at the hotel, I found a letter slipped under my door. Not mailed. Hand-delivered. The handwriting stopped me cold. It was my mother's. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before opening it. "Soraya, I don't know how to say any of this without sounding like I'm too late, because I am. You were always strong. We just didn't know what to do with a daughter we couldn't control. I called you weak because I didn't want to face how weak I was. I sold your things because I thought letting go was the same thing as moving on. I was wrong. I've watched your speech 5 times now. Your father's watched it more. We are proud of you. We were proud of you before this, but we didn't have the courage to say it. I'm sorry. Love, Mom." I stared at the paper until the words blurred. There was no demand in it. No plea to call her back or come to dinner. Just the slow unraveling of a mother who'd finally looked in the mirror. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, running my fingers over the ink. The apology didn't fix anything. It didn't bring Ruben back. It didn't unsell my memories. But it was real. And that counted for something. I folded it carefully and placed it in my journal. Not out of sentimentality, just a need to acknowledge that it happened. Later that evening, as I packed for the flight home, I found the last pair of the knitted bee socks I'd saved from those years ago. They were in a worn envelope, tucked behind some old travel receipts. I held them up and smiled. Ruben used to say, "Small things can hold big love." He wasn't wrong. Back in Seattle, the rhythm of my life resumed, but it felt shifted. Not derailed, not disturbed, just slightly moved. Like someone had adjusted the furniture of my soul while I was out of the room. Novescence was growing faster than I could keep up with. Sentinel had entered a new partnership with a Scandinavian medical network. We were working on a spin-off version aimed at pediatric diagnostics. I was in meetings constantly, but my mind would drift sometimes. Not to grief, exactly, but to stillness, to that letter, to that quiet street in Clayton, to the look in my mother's eyes when she said nothing at all. One morning, about 3 weeks after I returned, I was at my usual coffee spot on the corner of 3rd and Stewart, Cedar and Salt. The barista, Kai, greeted me with a lazy salute. "Black, hot, and fast?" they asked. I nodded. I liked places where no one cared who you were on TV. As I waited, I pulled out my phone and opened an email that had landed in my inbox overnight. Subject line, "Your story changed me." It was from a woman named Amelia in Michigan. Her husband had passed 2 years earlier from a rare condition Sentinel now helped detect. She said she hadn't left her house without medication since. She ended the email with, "I used to think grief shrank people. Then I saw you on TV. You made me believe it could build something, too." That one hit me harder than the letters from home. I read it 3 times. When Kai handed me my cup, I didn't even realize I was still holding the phone in my other hand. "You good?" they asked, their face softening. I nodded, blinking fast. Yeah, I'm good. Just one of those mornings. Dr. Asfor and I had fallen into a rhythm over the years, a sort of long-distance sisterhood built on midnight calls, co-signed grant proposals, and occasional snarky memes when we both needed to let off steam. She called me later that night. "You've seen the Finland deal, right?" she asked without preamble. "Yeah," I said, kicking off my shoes as I walked into my apartment. "I was going to call you about it tomorrow." "No, you weren't," she said, laughing. "You were going to read it in bed at 1 a.m. with tea, get overly sentimental, and start tweaking algorithms by sunrise." She wasn't wrong. We talked for 45 minutes about funding, logistics, and trial groups. But toward the end, she got quiet. "You good, Soraya?" she asked, her voice more careful now. "Yeah," I said. Then paused. "I got a letter. From my mother." "Did you read it?" "3 times. Maybe more." "And?" "It didn't fix anything. But it was honest." "That's rare," she said. "Honesty from the source of the damage." I sighed, lying back on the couch. "She said she sees me now." "Do you see her?" I didn't answer. "Not right away." "I don't know," I finally said. "I don't know who she is now." Weeks passed. Sentinel launched version 4.2. A small rural clinic in Kentucky sent us their first case study where the software caught early signs of vasculitis in a 14-year-old boy who hadn't even begun showing symptoms. I cried when I read the report. Not the ugly, grief-stricken kind of cry. The other kind. The quiet one that comes when you realize something you built is keeping someone else from falling into the hole you once lived in. Around the same time, I received another letter. Smaller envelope. Handwritten again. This time, it was from my father. I stared at it for nearly an hour before I opened it. "Soraya, I don't know how to write letters like your mother does. She has a way with words. I don't." But I watched the speech again. I watched it alone this time. "I didn't know you had Ruben's watch. The one with the cracked leather band. He used to let me fix it when it stopped. I always admired how he never replaced it." Said the crack gave it character. "You have more character than any person I've known. I just didn't have the character to tell you that. I'm sorry. For what I did. For what I didn't do." "Dad, I read that one only once." Then folded it and placed it next to my mother's. That weekend, Devin, my partner, returned from their artist residency in Taos. Devin teaches art therapy to veterans and is the most emotionally fluent person I've ever met. They don't just listen. They see. The kind of person who can hear what you're not saying. We were sitting on the back porch drinking chamomile tea when they asked, "Do you ever think you'll go back? To see them again?" "I don't know," I said. "It's not like I'm angry anymore. Just disconnected." They nodded slowly. Sometimes distance is what keeps people safe. Sometimes it's what keeps us safe. I think I needed them to be strangers for a while, I said. "And now?" I didn't answer. I just watched the sun sink behind the pine trees. There's a kind of light that comes in those last 10 minutes of the day, like the world is exhaling. "I think I'm starting to remember who I was before I was broken," I whispered. Devin didn't respond. Just reached over and squeezed my hand. Later that night, I opened a photo album I hadn't touched in years. Not the digital kind. The old school kind, with plastic sleeves and sticky corners. The one I kept tucked away in a drawer next to Ruben's copy of Watership Down. I flipped through pictures of our first road trip, the Thanksgiving we burned the turkey and ate cereal instead, the look on his face when I surprised him with the farmhouse keys. Then, tucked near the back, I found a photo I didn't remember placing there. It was me. Sitting in that old blue chair. A book in hand. Ruben's flannel wrapped around my shoulders. Odette must have taken it. Probably years before everything went to heck. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't hate it. It didn't feel like a wound anymore. The next letter I sent was my own. Typed, printed, and mailed with no return address. It was addressed simply, Odette and Roland Hale, Ridgeview Drive, Clayton, North Carolina. I had rehearsed the contents in my mind for weeks, rewriting it silently during sleepless nights and during those odd, still moments between Zoom calls. Here's what it said: Odette, Roland, I received your letters. I believe you both meant what you said. That matters. More than I ever expected. I don't think forgiveness is always loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it's just letting go of the version of someone that hurt you. I've let go. But I also want you to understand something, with full clarity. You tried to erase me. You discarded the things that made up my life, mocked my grief, and humiliated me when I was at my weakest. I didn't just survive that. I built something greater than either of you could ever dream of. Every time Sentinel catches an early diagnosis, every time a parent sees their child grow up healthy because of our work, I am reminded that I matter. That my grief mattered. That Ruben mattered. And that your opinion never did. You don't need to reach out again. This is not a door. This is a mirror. That face you saw on your television? That's the one you spit on. That's the one that rose without you. Soraya, it felt good. Not cruel. Not explosive. Just final. A quiet, deliberate strike. I didn't need to yell or cut them down in person. The world had already watched me rise without their help. That was the justice. That was the revenge. But what I didn't expect was the ripple it created. 2 months later, I received a request from a former neighbor, Mrs. Hollinger's daughter, to speak at a local Clayton women's event. Apparently, news of my award and the speech had gone far and wide in town. Rumors had done their work, half the neighborhood had filled in the blanks themselves. I was the girl who lost everything and then built it back with steel and code and grace. I said yes. It felt fitting to walk back into the place where I was once humiliated and instead stand behind a podium, not in grief, but in triumph. The community center looked almost exactly the same as it had when I was 25 and helping stack chairs for some church function my mom roped me into. The carpet was still the same pattern. The lights still buzzed slightly. But this time, they weren't looking past me. They were listening. I talked about grief. About innovation. About healing. But mostly, I talked about rebuilding when the world assumes you're too broken to matter. Afterward, people lined up to thank me. Hug me. Tell me about their losses. A woman in her 50s whispered, "Your words helped me leave someone who kept trying to shrink me." At the very end of the line stood Odette. Her hair was grayer, her posture slightly stooped. But her eyes were unmistakably hers, sharp, calculating, always observing. I didn't flinch. She opened her mouth, and I held up a hand. "Don't," I said gently. "This isn't for you." She nodded. Just once. Her eyes shone, but no tears fell. I turned and walked out the door, head high. 6 months later, Novescence expanded again. I was invited to speak at a UN symposium on global health data. My photo, once again, was everywhere. This time on international broadcasts. The camera panned in as I stood on stage, dressed in navy again, Ruben's watch peeking beneath my sleeve. The moderator asked, "When did you know you'd made it?" I smiled. There wasn't a moment. There was a series of small choices. But if I had to pick one? It was the day I realized I didn't need validation from the people who buried me. That success is quiet when it's real. It just keeps working. It keeps healing. Without applause. They applauded anyway. That night, back in Seattle, I made a fire. Devin was out of town, and Hugo, my dog, curled up next to me on the rug. I poured a glass of wine, opened a new journal, and wrote something simple at the top of the page: "That face is the one they spit on. That face is the one they now admire from afar." I didn't need vengeance. I didn't need to destroy them. The life I built was the mirror they had to live with. And that? That was enough. That was everything.